Third step prayer. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of bondages of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. Of thy power, thy love, thy way of life, may I do thy will always. Introduction, Step 3 in Love. Arriving at the God of my understanding. How did I arrive at the God of my understanding? It has been an evolutionary process. From the parochial grammar school and high school, where we were taught by the nuns about a God who was very punishing and not forgiving, like the one talked about in the Old Testament. I had a problem trying to live up to that God's expectations. When I started at Boston College, we were required to take theology and philosophy each year. God was portrayed as a little more loving God. I remember the priests teaching freshman theology, telling us to forget the religion of the nuns, that the real Catholic religion would be discussed in class and in our college textbook. I always got good grades in theology and philosophy. I remember taking a course called Natural Religion in my senior year, and in the textbook for the class, it said that we could not prove the existence of God or the non-existence of God scientifically or logically. We needed to take some things like the existence of God by faith alone. I never doubted the existence of God. The existence of living beings, nature, and the universe seemed to be evidence of a higher being. Before getting married, I was active in the Catholic Church. I went to Sunday Mass on a regular basis. I remember going to South Station Chapel for the 12 o'clock Mass and stopping at the club car for a few drinks afterwards. I also remember being away on active duty in the Army and going to confession on a Saturday afternoon. I then came out and remembered something I'd forgotten to tell the priest in confession. I went right back into the confessional, and when I told the priest that it had been 10 minutes since my last confession, he suggested that I might be going a little bit overboard. My religious practice was guilt-ridden, and I was having trouble living up to the rules and regulations of the Catholic Church as I understood them. I got married in a church in Milton at a Catholic wedding ceremony. My first wife, Jean, and I were married in a Catholic church in her home parish, St. Agatha's in Milton. We attended pre-Cana classes before getting married. The Catholic Church required pre-Cana courses or consolation for the couples planning to marry in the Catholic Church. After we got married, we bought a house in Marshfield and started a family. Our children were baptized. They went to CCD and received Holy Communion. We attended the Assumption Church as a family until they got a new pastor who was a former Army chaplain. Every Sunday sermon was full of fire and brimstone. My wife Jean could not stand being berated and scolded every Sunday. She longed for a more loving church, so we started to go to St. Anne's in Marshfield for Sunday Mass. Our third child, Stephen, was born prematurely with a lot of birth defects at South Shore Hospital. I was in the delivery room for the first time for any of my children's births. I could tell there was a problem, and they asked me to leave the room. Jean wanted to have him baptized right away. Jean chose the name Stephen Patrick, and I had no objection. They decided to transfer him to St. Margaret's Hospital in Dorchester. At St. Margaret's, he was having trouble breathing, and a young intern they recognized it had something called floppy trachea. This was known as tracheomalacia, which is a condition in which the cartilage in the wall of the trachea softens, resulting in a floppy or weak airway that collapses when breathing and makes breathing difficult. They had suspected originally that he had hyaline membrane disease, also called respiratory distress syndrome, RDS. This is a condition that causes babies to need extra oxygen and to help breathing. HMD is one of the most common problems seen in premature babies. They had put Stephen on a CPAP machine, but he still had problems breathing. This is the disease that the Kennedy baby died of, and also my sister Kathy's son Sean. They suggested that he be transferred to floating hospital because there was a doctor there, Dr. Lucian Lee, who was very experienced in treating that condition. Here they performed a tracheotomy, which is a procedure to help air and oxygen reach the lungs by creating an opening in the trachea, the windpipe, from outside the neck. A person with a tracheotomy breathes through a tracheotomy tube inserted in the opening. After a long stay in the hospital, most of which was spent in the hospital ICU, they decided that Stephen could go home. Jean spent a week in the hospital learning how to take care of him. She stayed all day and night at Floating Hospital, and Jean was staying in a leukemia ward. The children in the ward were terrified of the nurses and would start crying and screaming when they saw the nurse starting to come towards them, because the nurses were the ones who were giving them chemotherapy. Stephen was home for, I think, about 6 months, and we had to return to the hospital a couple of times with him. He had problems with his pituitary gland, for which he got a shot each day. One day at home, he went into a seizure, and we had to get him to South Shore Hospital, where they eventually transferred him to Floating Hospital. We had to wait a while for a diagnosis, and eventually we were notified that he was effectively brain dead. They asked us if we wanted them to take him off life support. We both agreed to having him do that. We had both seen a 14-year-old girl stay in the ICU in a vegetative state for a couple of months. She was effectively brain dead. It was a real heart-wrenching sight to see her family come in every day to visit with her. After Stephen passed away, we had a problem getting his funeral mass at the church that we attended because it was not our home parish. Eventually, the pastor at St. Anne's went ahead with the funeral mass over the objections of the other pastor. My wife felt betrayed by the church and stopped going to church. I also stopped going to church, and it was a lot easier sleeping in on Sunday mornings with a hangover than going to church with a hangover. I continued to believe in God, but I did not pray rightly to Him, and I did not honor the Sabbath. Quote from the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, interpreted by the Hazelton Foundation. We have diverse religious backgrounds ranging from non-existent to very strict. Even those of us who feel we have believed in God in the past may find that our relationship has gone awry, and we have despaired of our belief. When I got in trouble, I would ask God to get me out of it. Quote from the 12 and 12, page 32. We had not even prayed rightly. We had always said, "Grant me my wishes instead of thy will be done." I came into AA and started to stay sober. In AA, I developed the God of my understanding, who was a loving and forgiving and could live up, I could live up to his requirements. I asked him to help me stay sober while I worked on my character defects and helping other alcoholics to stay sober. I started to attend the Mass Talbot spiritual retreats on a semi-annual basis. They were significant in helping me grow spiritually, but I was not active in the steps. I was not bringing AA home to my house. My first wife and I had stopped doing things together after my son passed away. We slept in separate bedrooms. Consequently, I got a divorce, and I remarried about a year after getting divorced. I continued to go to the Matt Talbot retreats, but now I was not able to participate in the sacrament of the Catholic Church since I was a divorced Catholic. My second wife and I met at an organization known as New Beginnings. It was held in a Protestant church in Norwell. New Beginnings provides support programs for adults who are distressed over being separated, widowed, divorced, or never married, and to help them find purpose and wholeness in all dimensions of their lives after experiencing a loss. The self-help facilitated group support we provide is emotional, spiritual, physical, and intellectual, with a safe environment that promotes healing. Karen and I enjoyed our life together, and we had a lot in common. Karen introduced me to a lot of new experiences. We had first lived together in an apartment in South Boston for a couple of years. We would often go to the North End, sometimes walking there. I was very active with the South Boston Running Club, known as the L Street Running Club, and I trained with them for my last half marathon in 1997, and my last half marathon in 2009. I ran the marathon before Karen and I were actually together as a couple. But after we were a couple, I would go on training runs Sunday morning. Karen would say that was fine, but there would be no whining Sunday afternoon, since we were going someplace which she had planned for that Sunday afternoon. We became members of the MFA in Boston and would make trips to the MFA and the Garden Museum often. Karen loved going to art museum and had gone to the museum school for a while after graduating from high school. Our first date was to the MFA to see the Monet exhibit. We had often talked about the MFA on our breaks at New Beginnings. I had told her that my daughter Karen who graduated from Rhode Island School of Design, and I visited the MFA a couple of times. Karen, my wife, fit right in with any group I was associated with. The Northeastern faculty, L Street Running Club, my family, and my friends. Karen and I went to Northeastern University faculty dinner, where Karen made a positive impression on all my fellow faculty members, and one of my fellow faculty members referred to us as a power couple. She was also well-liked and well-known by my fellow senior members of the L Street Running Club. She had tremendous people skills and was constantly trying to fix up her single male, my single male friends with some of her friends. I continued to be active in my AA home group, going to meetings and commitments. Also, I would go twice a year to the Matt Talbot retreats. She would go to some of the meetings, mostly anniversaries. She told me she did not get a big kick out of being home alone while I was at evening meetings. So I joined a meeting that met on Sundays during the day, and I cut back on my evening commitments. If a commitment was on the South Shore, I would drive her to her daughter's house and pick her up at her daughter's after the meeting was over. Also, she would stay at her daughter's house on the weekends that I was at the Matt Talbot retreats. We were married in a Protestant church, and I was therefore unable to receive sacraments. I continued to go to the Matt Talbot retreats, and I was doing the steps through an AWOL. The retreat house I attended for my retreats, the Sacred Heart Retreat Center in Wareham, Mass., had a new retreat director named Father Stan. I made a fifth step with Father Stan. Father Stan turned the fifth step into a sacrament of reconciliation. He gave me absolution from my divorce and asked me if I planned on staying with Karen, my present wife, until death do us part, to which I answered yes. Couples retreats. A woman who attended one of the women's Matt Talbot retreat groups made a suggestion to Father Stan that the retreat house should start to offer couples retreats. Karen and I went to our first couples retreat shortly after her mother had passed away. She was still in the process of grieving her mother's death. Father Stan was excellent to Karen. I had to leave Saturday morning to teach school at Northeastern University. Father Stan entertained Karen by giving her a tour of his studio. He showed her a painting they had done of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, where he had used some broken glass to liven up his painting. This was made from crystal that his mother had owned. He explained that this was part of his grieving process and done to memorialize his mother. He also had his mother's wedding ring welded to the bottom of his chalice, which he used when saying Mass. Karen came home and started to make shadow boxes for all the women in her immediate family, using her mother's costume jewelry and her grandmother's lace doilies. We started to go back to church and made Sunday our date night. We go to church on Sunday and then go out afterwards. My wife Karen diagnosed with Alzheimer's. New line. Karen was concerned about her memory and had been referred to a neurologist by her primary care doctor. She had been evaluated by the neurologist, but initially he had ruled out Alzheimer's. After her mother's death, she had kind of a meltdown at work, and I was called to pick her up. She also had another incident where she was on her way down to visit her daughter, and she came back home all upset because she could not remember how to get to her daughter's house. She had previously owned that house. After the incident at work, she was put on medical leave, and when she went back to the neurologist to be tested, they did an EEG on her brain and gave her a memory test. This time they diagnosed that she had the beginnings of Alzheimer's. They put her on some medication to slow down the progression of the disease. She had bad reactions to that medication, and we had to take her off the medication. Between me and her brother Jack, we planned to do a lot of traveling to take Karen's mind off her Alzheimer's. I tried to get her back to painting and drawing. I set up an area for her to work in by dividing my office space. We enrolled in a couple of courses at the Quincy Senior Center, in an acrylic painting class where we both made a drawing of tulips. We also enrolled in an adult coloring book class, which she seemed to really enjoy until she got to the point where she did not want to go out of the house. We also tried to continue going to church and out to eat on Sundays until again she didn't want to go out of the house. We had booked a trip to Ireland to go to my niece's weddings. I had made the reservations for the plane and the hotel, but at the last minute, Karen decided she did not want to go. She said she would stay with her brother in Maine so I could go. I drove her to Maine and then drove back the next day to Logan Airport to fly to Ireland for my niece's wedding. Karen's death and my spiritual experience. Karen had fallen during an electro blackout at home, and she broke 4 ribs. She was taken to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Milton, and then was transferred after about 2 weeks to a rehab facility. She did poorly. She was then taken to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Milton again. And then she was transferred to Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, where she stayed for about a month. She spent a lot of time in the intensive care unit, and she had developed night terrors. Patients in intensive care units, ICU, are highly susceptible to experiencing night terrors due to the stressful and disruptive environment, which can significantly disrupt sleeping patterns, often leading to sleep deprivation and causing symptoms similar to night terrors and sometimes referred to as ICU delirium. We then had her evaluated by hospice, and she was able to come home under hospice. A hospice nurse tried to get the night terrors under control by having us give her morphine. She went into a kind of coma with heavy breathing, and she did not speak for a couple of days. The hospice nurse suggested that I might try reading to her, so I decided to try the Psalms from the Old Testament. And I started with her favorite Psalm, Psalm 23. And all of a sudden she started to talk. She was able to talk with her daughter and her grandchildren for a few hours. Then she slipped back into the coma again. The next morning, which was the day she passed away, I went into the room she was staying in and kissed her on the forehead and said, "I love you." She said, "I love you" back to me, and that was the last word she was to say. She passed away that evening with her family present, her daughter, myself, my son, her brother, and her sister-in-law. It was a very peaceful passing. She actually passed on October 31st, 2016, around 11:30 p.m., which was Halloween, one of her favorite holidays. But the hospice nurse did not get there until 12:30 a.m., November 1st, 2016. So her death certificate says she died on November 1st, 2016. We had a Catholic funeral mass at St. John the Baptist in Quincy. I did the eulogy with the help of my daughter, Karen. Karen, my wife, was buried at Blue Hill Cemetery in her father and mother's grave. For several years, I would have a memorial mass on the day of her death until I got sick in 2018. In 2018, I flunked a stress test and ended up with a quadruple bypass. I will talk about that later. My next important event on my spiritual journey is my return to meditation. Meditation interest renewed. I had been practicing meditation on and off since the late 1980s. I had been running one day and feeling exceptionally good about the run I had just done. So I decided to have a blood pressure check, my blood pressure checked at one of those free blood pressure clinics in work, and my blood pressure was very high. I followed that up with an appointment with a specialist at MGH. It was very expensive, and he suggested that I increase the medication I was already taking. I was not satisfied with that diagnosis and looked for an alternative. I heard about Herbert Benson's book, The Relaxation Response, and I started to use meditation. My blood pressure started returning to normal. I also read his book, Beyond the Relaxation Response. He had mentioned in his book that meditation had been part of Eastern cultures since before Christ. He mentioned in particular the Taoists, which is a Chinese philosophy and religion that emphasizes living in harmony with the universe. I looked it up on the internet and found a Taoist master, Mantak Chia. He introduced me to a meditation known as the inner smile, which I practiced for years. Smiling is a secret to health and serenity, according to several spiritual traditions. The inner smile practices profounds that when you smile like a Buddha, the world beams back. I'd gotten away from regular meditation practice when in 2016 my cousin Shelley told me about a meditation class that was being presented where she lived, and it was free. I had taught computer classes at Southern Artery, which is where my cousin lived, and was a member of the garden club over there that ran trips and scheduled classes. My wife Karen and I had gone on a couple of their trips. The meditation course was taught by a resident named Jane, who was a retired nurse practitioner and a holistic healer. She would sometimes start her meditation with a body scan, which I was familiar with from having practiced the inner smile meditation. I also started to hear about mindfulness in the present moment, and a few modern advocates of this philosophy, people like John Kabat-Zinn, Eckhart Tolle, and Thich Nhat Hanh. I was a regular attendee until I got sick in 2018. Sometimes the meditations were held outside in the good weather. This is an example of a meditation with Jane. The people in our group use many different types of meditation concentrations. Examples are body scan, concentrating and counting breaths, imagination, repeating a mantra or a sound, recalling music or songs. After 20 minutes, the bell is rung 3 times again. Then Jane would slowly bring us back with a short body scan. We then would have a discussion of what was experienced during the meditation class, and the class would end at 11 a.m. Our meditation leader, Jane, passed away on January 1st, 2021. 2 of our group members, Bob and Helen, suggested we continue our meditation group. I volunteered to do this on Zoom since it was the winter and I was having some problems getting around. I have a Zoom license that I pay monthly, which allows me to run meetings more than an hour. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 10 a.m. On Tuesday, and we usually wrap up by 11 a.m. On Tuesdays, we listen to a YouTube video which guides us through a directed meditation done by people like Wayne Dyer, Eckhart Tolle, and John Kabat-Zinn, or Thich Nhat Hanh. Sometimes I will use the daily meditation suggested by YouTube, which are usually on topics like mindfulness, present moment, power of now, mindful breathing, inner smile, loving kindness, and the sound of the divine. We have a core group of 5 people attending. We've been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. We had some people join us and then drop out over those 3 years. A couple of times we've tried to run Zoom meetings at Southern Artery in a classroom environment, but we've had trouble with the audio. On Thursdays, I select a meditation music video from the video suggested by YouTube for that day. Everyone in the group does their own favorite method of meditating, and at the end of 20 minutes, we stop and discuss the meditation. On both Tuesdays and Thursdays, someone, usually me, will read a daily reflection before listening to the YouTube video.